If any game could be said to have defined a genre, it would be Doom. Doom may be the single most influential game of all time, and Doom 2, while not as influential, is spectacular in its own right. The third game in the series, Doom 3, isn't necessarily bad, but it struggles to live up to the fast-paced and fun action of its predecessors. Of course, being the worst game of the three, the movie is based mostly on this game. Some of the problems that plague this game, namely the darkness, fall through into the movie. The movie's plot is spectacularly simple. Mr. Bean, The Rock, and a bunch of cannon fodder are sent to Mars through a portal called the Ark to retrieve property for a research corporation after a mysterious lockdown is enacted. We also get a hilarious shot of legs being teleported to a planet separate from the rest of the body. One of the archaeologists on the station is Mr. Bean's sister, who he doesn't get along with well.
Test weapons up here?
Well, it's a dead planet. You want my stuff tested here where it's safe or in your own backyard? We're primarily an archaeological operation. Weapons research is in its own separate facility. It has nothing to do with Dr. Carmack's work.
How many inside when the lab shut down?
Only Dr. Carmack's team, that's 6 people.
Most of this movie is full of boring exposition, arguing and wandering through dark corridors shooting mostly irrelevant zombies. The only important exposition is about the humans who used to live on Mars who gave themselves a 24th chromosome, but instead of Down syndrome, they gain superpowers, and by that I mean they turn into demons. A few of the cannon fodder die and are reincarnated as the various Doom monsters. While the designs of these monsters are decent, there's not a lot going on. The skinny nerd takes some skills with the creepy guy to get high, and it's completely unimportant. The black guy that doesn't die... Oh wait, he dies later. But that guy tries to get with Mr. Bean's sister, and while working with her traps one of the monsters in a wall, which is pretty neat, but it doesn't really matter. The only scene worth anything in the cannon fodder get killed section of the movie is the absurd fight in the electrified jail cell, which has a hilarious shot of a man swinging a computer above his head to fight off a demon. The last part of the pointless fun in this movie is of course the famous FPS scene. When I saw the scene only a few years ago, I was still impressed by how fun it was. Rewatching it now makes me realize that it's just a rail shooter without the gameplay. The movements of the character are unnaturally smooth, most of the sequence is mediocre CGI, there's a hilariously awkward moon jump, and it ends with an awkward fight against the wheelchair man in slug form. My favorite part of this segment is the 2 seconds of a monster being blown up by a mine. The rest of it, while interesting compared to the close-up POV shot repeat style filmmaking the rest of the movie has, is sadly still barely a notch above mediocre. In the end, The Rock goes somewhat crazy. It turns out that the item they are to retrieve is a video of an experiment that revives the dead. This experiment got out of hand and led to the monsters in the movie. The Rock decides to kill all his teammates and a bunch of innocent civilians for no reason. Mr. Bean slingshots him into the air with a metal pole that is elastic enough to pull out but is stiff enough for The Rock to turn into a weapon later. Oh, and The Rock also turns into a zombie, but a smart, talking one. Mr. Bean takes the pole to the hand, comically spins The Rock around and launches him into the Ark, followed by a grenade. At this point, the movie very abruptly ends with Mr. Bean and his sister riding an elevator. That's really all there is to this movie. Most of it is just terrible filler. This movie is not an adaptation of Doom, but instead of Doom 3, and I will review it as such. It's not like the first game had much to adapt and form a story anyway. The movie takes a lot from Doom 3, including the Mars setting and the darkness, which was so fucking prevalent in the game it might as well have been its own character's back, and everyone in this movie. It makes a lot of the scenes in this movie somewhat difficult to discern. A few weapons from the games, including the BFG, appear, although the movie lacks many of the characteristic monsters that were so recognizable. Pinky is an awkward wheelchair monster, and some have their fireballs but can create new demons by implanting a 24th chromosome in humans. And the monster in the cage is a Hell Knight, not that it's very easy to see. The most iconic Doom boss, a cyber demon, is completely absent, replaced with slightly demon The Rock. Demons are also weird biological abominations as opposed to literal demons from hell. This movie has enough relation to Doom 3 and feeling and reference that is obviously a Doom 3 adaptation, but it misses a few points that were fairly important to the game itself. As a whole, it's a reasonable adaptation that strays from some of the story elements of Doom 3 but keeps in line with the theme, atmosphere, and general look. As a movie, Doom is fairly forgettable. A large portion of this movie is boring at best. It's tough to sit through portions of the movie with exposition for 2 reasons. The first is that exposition only exists to fill the time between action, which is a backwards way to write a movie. A good example of this is the two guys who take Skittles to get high. This scene is addressed in one later scene where Mr. Bean threatens the scrawny guy and tells him that using the drugs makes him a danger to the team. But he never is, and in fact, he manages to survive all the way until the end of the...
Go to hell.
But still, it wasn't the drugs that got him killed. The other reason is because the movie feels the need to endlessly explain everything because they think their audience is stupid. Something will be shown, then endlessly explained back and forth in case the audience is too dumb to take a visual cue. Doom doesn't look great either. A lot of the movie is murky and dark, and despite a few impressive practical effects, and the fact that there is practical fake blood in the fucking movie, the movie is filled with ugly CGI blood. A lot of the CGI heavy sequences, including the FPS scene, have begun to show their age, and despite the FPS scene being the genuine highlight of the film, the scene feels excessive and awkward. Two good moments are interspersed with a lot of lame shots and nothing happening, despite the fact that the Doom movie was originally supposed to have the entire movie shot in this manner. The movie also has somewhat awkward moments that are either the result of bad editing or bad planning. The world's briefest cutaway to Pinky losing his legs feels so out of place with everything else I can't even begin to figure out why it was left in. Shots of The Rock being swung around like he's made of paper, and a second the FPS portion of the movie where Mr. Bean moon jumps over an alien also come to mind. The characters in the movie are flatter than anyone could expect. The closest thing the movie has to a real character is The Rock being so dedicated to his mission that he murders innocent civilians for no reason. Doom doesn't have a lot of positives to even talk about. The monster in the wall and the creepy living tongues are cool, but most of the movie is just a slog. When it boils down to it, Doom was a movie that had potential but didn't know how to cash it.